What if the first humans, standing under a sky untouched by cities or noise, asked themselves the same question you quietly ask today when life becomes too heavy to carry alone? Where does inner strength come from when the world around you collapses into chaos? This thought, simple yet overwhelming, may have echoed in the mind of an ancestor who lived 5.1 million years ago, long before language, long before ritual, long before the idea of spirituality even had a name. Imagine the raw uncertainty of that world, a landscape where survival depended not only on physical resilience, but on something deeper, an instinctive form of spiritual awareness that helped them face fear, loneliness, and the unknown. Standing in the silence of prehistoric nights, they sensed forces they could not explain but could feel within their bones, forces that shaped the earliest whispers of meaning long before symbols were carved into stone. As we step into their world, we begin to notice how every sound, every movement of the wind, every shift in the shadows carried a message. These early ancestors did not have doctrines or stories to guide them, yet they had perception sharpened by necessity, intuition amplified by danger, and a strange inner voice that pushed them forward. Could it be that spiritual strength did not begin with religion, but with the urgent need to find direction in a world without certainty? And if so, what does that reveal about your own search for grounding today? The connection between past and present becomes unavoidable when we understand that the human spirit has been reaching for meaning long before it knew how to speak. You have probably felt this same pull during moments when life tightens around you, when your thoughts tremble between confusion and clarity. Have you ever wondered why certain experiences feel older than your memory, as if borrowed from someone who lived before you? Stay with this question as we continue, because what you are about to discover may shift the way you see yourself. Before we move deeper into the ancient landscape of human consciousness, share your thoughts in the comments and let your perspective enrich this exploration. And do not forget to like the video and check if you are already subscribed to the channel, as these simple gestures help this journey reach others who need it too. Now let us step further into the world our ancestors faced, carried by the thread they left behind. As we move deeper into that ancestral world, the first thing that strikes us is the overwhelming presence of chaos. Not chaos as noise or confusion, but as a constant force shaping every breath of existence. Our early ancestors lived in a landscape where the boundaries between safety and danger shifted moment by moment. Thunder splitting the sky without warning, predators emerging from tall grass, rivers changing course overnight, famine appearing after a single failed season. This instability carved the psychological framework of the earliest hominids long before they knew how to store memory in symbols. Their minds were sculpted by unpredictability, and this shaped a primitive form of spiritual awareness that was less about belief and more about survival. Inside this environment, fear was not an emotion to escape, but a tool that sharpened perception. The mind learned to listen beyond what the senses could confirm. A rustle in the distance was not just a sound, it was a warning, a possibility, a lesson. Over time, the human brain began developing the capacity to anticipate patterns, to sense meaning in what seemed meaningless. This emerging intuition laid the foundation for something much deeper, the recognition that life operated through invisible forces that demanded respect. In a world without explanations, the unknown became sacred simply because it was powerful. Every storm, every nightfall, every inexplicable event pressed the early mind toward reflection, awakening an inner space where spiritual strength slowly took shape. Yet chaos did not only come from nature. Social dynamics among early groups were unstable as well. Competition for food, unpredictable alliances, the fragile bond between individuals who depended on one another, yet struggled for dominance. These interactions formed the first emotional landscapes, teaching early humans how to navigate tension, empathy, fear, and belonging. From these struggles emerged the earliest sparks of meaning, as individuals began to understand that their actions influenced not only physical outcomes, but the emotional environment of the group. Something internal responded to this realization, a quiet voice urging balance, connection, and awareness. This inner response became one of the earliest seeds of spirituality, giving humans a sense of inner guidance amid the volatile world that surrounded them. As you follow this path through the ancient mind, a subtle pattern emerges. Spiritual strength was not a luxury or a philosophy, but a necessity, born directly from chaos. And as the environment continued pressing against human vulnerability, the mind adapted by creating new layers of perception, preparing the ground for the symbolic messages that would soon begin to appear, carved not in stone yet, but in behavior, instinct, and shared memory that would carry humanity forward into the next stage of awareness as deeper forms of meaning began to take shape. As the early human mind evolved within this tension between danger and awakening, something remarkable began to happen. Before language, before myth, even before deliberate ritual, our ancestors started leaving traces of their internal world in subtle gestures and instinctive behaviors. These were not yet symbols carved on rock, but symbolic actions expressed through movement, posture, and the way they interacted with their surroundings. Imagine a small group gathering around the body of a fallen companion, not merely out of instinct, but with a hesitation that suggested awareness of loss. A hand placed on the earth, a stone positioned near the body, a pause that carried weight. These early gestures were not random. They were the first attempts to communicate meaning in a world where meaning had no fixed form yet. Over generations, such instinctive acts solidified into patterns, a certain way of marking a trail, a repeated motion when confronting fear, a shared rhythm when coordinating during the hunt. These recurring actions reflected a growing recognition that the group's emotional landscape needed expression. Before the first spoken myth, these patterns served as living memory, encoding lessons about danger, cooperation, and survival. A tilt of the head toward the sky might have indicated respect or fear of forces they felt, but could not name. A circle of bodies around a fire created unity long before they understood why gathering close made them feel stronger. These gestures absorbed the unspoken wisdom of each generation, transforming experience into something that could be passed forward. Even the marks left unintentionally carried meaning. Scratches on cave walls, the arrangement of bones after a meal, pathways worn into the ground by repeated movement. As early humans noticed these traces, they began developing a new relationship with their environment. The world around them stopped being only a threat or resource. It became a canvas that responded to their actions. The boundary between external and internal started to blur, and the earliest forms of symbolic thinking emerged. A stone placed upright was no longer just a stone. It became a marker, a memory, a reminder that existence had layers beneath the surface. These subtle creations were the first bridges between the physical world and the evolving spiritual awareness that pulsed within them. As these early symbolic behaviors accumulated, they shaped a form of communication that did not rely on words, but on presence and repetition. Meaning traveled through the group as much through what they did as through what they experienced. And as these actions gained collective significance, the foundation for ritual and spiritual interpretation quietly took root, preparing human consciousness for a new phase where symbolic messages would evolve into deliberate practices that strengthened the group's identity and deepened their sense of purpose amid the vast and unpredictable world. As these gestures and instinctive markings accumulated through generations, the seeds of ritual began to take shape. At first, These early rituals were nothing more than repeated behaviors that seemed to bring stability in moments of fear or uncertainty. A hand pressed to the earth before crossing a dangerous terrain, a quiet moment taken before lighting the fire, a collective hum or rhythmic movement performed during the hunt. These actions were born from necessity, yet over time they gained a deeper significance that transcended their practical origins. Early humans began to feel that these repeated motions connected them to something larger than themselves, something that existed beyond the immediate moment. This was the earliest form of spiritual structure, not a belief system, but a pattern of behavior that introduced meaning where chaos once ruled unchecked. Within the intimate circle of the group, these emerging rituals served as anchors. They provided psychological stability in an unpredictable environment, creating a sense of continuity from one day to the next. When the group repeated a sequence of gestures around a fire or during a moment of collective fear, they were doing more than reacting to their world. They were shaping it, giving their experiences form and rhythm. Over many generations, these rituals became messages in themselves, encoded with lessons about danger, cooperation, hope, and resilience. Even without words, the early humans understood that certain actions helped them feel grounded, united, and guided by forces they could sense, but not explain. Some rituals emerged directly from the landscape. A massive tree, a striking rock formation, the mouth of a cave illuminated by the last light of day. These natural structures were not just part of the environment. They became spiritual landmarks. Meeting near them, moving around them, or leaving offerings at their base created a shared emotional map that strengthened the group's identity. The land became inseparable from the growing spiritual consciousness, shaping rituals that reflected the deepening connection between human beings and the world that held them. As these rituals took on more meaning, they evolved into the earliest messages of spiritual strength passed from one generation to the next. These were messages not spoken but embodied, preserved in movement and repetition, shaping the mentality of the group with each small act of reverence or unity. And while these rituals did not yet contain symbols carved in stone, they carried the same power, a way of transforming fear into purpose and uncertainty into shared understanding. Their legacy would eventually expand into the mythic and symbolic world that future humans would inherit as their spiritual foundation. Before we continue unfolding how these early rituals evolved into complex spiritual narratives, share your thoughts in the comments and let me know what these ancestral gestures evoke for you, as your perspective adds depth to this exploration. As these rituals deepened and wove themselves into the fabric of early human life, a powerful force continued shaping the inner landscape of our ancestors: fear. Not the modern fear that emerges from abstract worries, but a raw, visceral fear born from the unpredictability of nature and the fragility of survival. Every crack of thunder, every shadow moving beyond the firelight, every unfamiliar scent carried on the wind could determine life or death. Yet it was precisely this fear that pushed the early mind toward a new dimension of awareness. Instead of paralyzing them, it forged an internal space where reflection began to take root. Fear did not simply warn them, it taught them, shaping a primitive understanding that life operated within forces both visible and invisible. This tension between terror and curiosity sparked the earliest moments of transcendence. When the group gathered around the fire after surviving a dangerous encounter, the silence that fell over them was not emptiness. It was a shared recognition of something beyond their immediate senses. In those moments, their breathing slowed, their eyes softened, and a strange awareness seemed to settle over the group. They were not just reacting to the world, they were contemplating it. Fear became a gateway, pulling them inward, prompting them to search for meaning behind the events they could not control. This deepened their rituals, shaping them into acts not only of survival, but of interpretation, a way to extract significance from the difficulties they faced. But transcendence did not arise solely from fear. Survival itself created a bond that held the group together. When one member was injured, others responded instinctively with protection or shared food. This cooperation nurtured empathy, and empathy opened a new pathway toward spiritual awakening. Through these emotional exchanges, early humans discovered that the strength of the group was greater than the sum of its parts. They learned that their inner state influenced collective survival, and this realization seeded the idea that spiritual strength was not isolated but shared. Their unity became a force as vital as fire or shelter, shaping their understanding of meaning in ways that extended beyond individual experience. Over time, these emotional dynamics generated a deeper sense of inner life. When a member of the group hesitated at the cave entrance or paused before drinking from a river, others noticed. These subtle expressions of fear or uncertainty became part of the group's emotional vocabulary, giving rise to collective interpretation. A trembling hand could signal danger. A confident stance could restore calm. These early forms of emotional communication laid the foundation for the first spiritual insights, teaching early humans that the unseen realm of feelings held power equal to the physical world. In this way, fear and transcendence intertwined, guiding humanity toward a more complex inner world that would soon give rise to myth, symbolic meaning, and the expanding spiritual consciousness that shaped the next stages of human evolution. As fear and shared emotion carved the first chambers of inner awareness, a single discovery transformed everything our ancestors understood about themselves and the world: fire. To us, fire is ordinary, contained, predictable. But to early humans, encountering fire for the first time must have felt like meeting a force that lived between worlds. Its warmth pushed back the cold that gnawed at their bones. Its glow held the darkness at a distance. Its crackling movement seemed alive, unpredictable yet strangely responsive. Fire became not only a tool for survival, but a profound symbol, a bridge between the visible and invisible. When early humans gathered around it, something awakened inside them that no other discovery had stirred. The fire was unlike the wind, the rain, or the predators they had always known. It obeyed rules that seemed to hint at hidden order. It grew when fed, and died when neglected. It required care, attention, presence. For the first time, humans interacted with a force that mirrored their own existence, fragile yet powerful, consuming yet giving, dangerous yet essential. This relationship fostered a new layer of spiritual awareness. The act of tending the fire became a silent ritual, a moment where individuals connected to a source greater than themselves. Watching flames dance in the darkness invited contemplation, and contemplation opened the door to symbolic thought. Around this flickering center, the group began forming patterns that shaped their social and emotional lives. They arranged their bodies in circles, unknowingly creating one of the oldest spiritual shapes known to humanity. The circle around the fire encouraged equality, communication, and shared understanding. Shadows cast on cave walls gave rise to the first visual metaphors, where movement transformed into meaning. Even the sparks that rose into the night sky mirrored the stars above, creating a link between earthly experience and the vast unknown. These experiences became embedded in memory, deepening the connection between fire and spiritual identity. The fire also changed the rhythm of life. Night no longer forced instant withdrawal into darkness. With fire, early humans gained time to reflect, time to observe, time to feel the presence of others. This extended awareness nurtured empathy and storytelling long before stories took structured form. The firelight illuminated faces, allowing subtle emotions to be shared unconsciously. Through these exchanges, the group sensed a growing unity, as if the fire itself held their collective spirit together. Over generations, this sense of unity shaped the first intentional rituals, where fire served as both teacher and witness. In this glowing convergence of survival and symbolism, the human mind expanded. Fire became more than warmth or protection. It became a portal into the unseen layers of existence. Through its flicker, early humans encountered a reflection of their own inner fire, a spiritual resilience that would guide them through the uncertainties of their world and prepare them for the emergence of myth and the deeper spiritual messages carried across millennia. As fire reshaped the emotional and spiritual center of early human life, something even more transformative began to emerge: the birth of narrative. Long before words existed, our ancestors created meaning through shared imagination. Sitting around the glowing heart of the fire, they watched shadows shift along the cave walls, forming shapes that echoed animals, spirits, and ancestors. These moving silhouettes stirred something profound inside them, awakening the earliest sense that life was woven from layers of seen and unseen forces. In those moments, the mind reached beyond immediate survival and touched mystery. This leap into symbolic imagination marked one of the greatest turning points in human evolution. Narrative was not yet spoken, but it lived in gesture, expression, and shared attention. When a hunter mimed the movement of a predator he had escaped, the group understood not only the danger, but the emotional weight of the encounter. When someone raised their hands toward the sky after a storm, others felt the intention behind the gesture. These actions became proto-stories, experiences transformed into meaning, meaning transformed into memory. Through these early narratives, humans stitched together fragmented events into a coherent sense of reality. The world stopped being random. It became interpretable. It became alive with significance. As these narrative impulses grew stronger, the group began to see patterns where before they had only seen events: the cycle of seasons, the migration of animals, the passing of life into death, and death into memory. Each pattern invited interpretation. Each interpretation invited imagination. Over time, these reflections crystallized into what we might call the first myths, though they had no words, no formal structure. They were emotional truths expressed through shared perception. These myths acted as psychological maps, helping individuals navigate fear, loss, triumph, and uncertainty. They offered comfort not through explanation but through connection, reminding every member of the group that they were part of something larger and older than themselves. The emergence of these early myths also shaped the group's inner cohesion. By interpreting the world together, they forged a collective consciousness that strengthened their ability to endure hardship. When a dangerous event occurred, it could be retold through gesture and expression, turning terror into teaching. When fortune blessed them, it could be shared through symbolic reenactment, reinforcing gratitude and unity. Through this dynamic exchange, the group discovered that narrative was not merely entertainment, it was survival. It preserved knowledge, encoded emotion, and reinforced the spiritual threads that bound them to one another and to the unpredictable world around them. Before we continue deepening this exploration of ancestral meaning, share in the comments what these early mythic sparks evoke in you, as your reflections help illuminate the path forward in this journey through the ancient mind. As these early mythic sparks continued to shape human consciousness, the landscape itself began to play a central role in the developing spiritual identity of our ancestors. To them, the world was not a backdrop, but an active participant in their lives, a living presence with moods, rhythms, and intentions. Mountains were not simply geological formations. They were guardians watching over the land. Rivers were not merely sources of water. They were moving paths that carried stories and warnings. The wind was not an invisible force. It was a whisper from something beyond their understanding. Every feature of the environment carried meaning, and in this meaning the earliest spiritual insights took root. In a time when the world was still vast and uncharted, humans learned to read its signs with remarkable sensitivity. A shift in the color of the sky before dawn could signal the coming of danger. The sudden silence of birds could reveal the presence of predators. The changing pattern of shadows during the day might suggest a shift in weather or even hint at spiritual presence. Over generations, these observations accumulated into an intuitive language that shaped the earliest forms of guidance. The landscape became a mirror of the inner world, reflecting emotions, fears, and hopes back to those who walked upon it. Certain places gained particular significance. A hill, where lightning repeatedly struck, became a site of awe. A cave, where the wind entered with a low, resonant hum, became a place of gathering. A solitary tree standing against the horizon became a marker of direction and meaning. These natural landmarks evolved into spiritual touchstones that grounded the group's understanding of the world. They represented stability in an environment filled with uncertainty, offering psychological anchors that helped early humans interpret their experiences with greater coherence. Returning to these places created a sense of continuity, linking past moments with present challenges. The landscape also shaped the emotional vocabulary of early humans. Vast open plains evoked vulnerability and vigilance, teaching the importance of awareness. Dense forests created feelings of concealment and mystery, encouraging caution and imagination. Towering cliffs inspired awe and introspection, prompting individuals to contemplate forces greater than themselves. These emotional responses were not random. They became integral to the group's spiritual development. The environment influenced their rituals, inspired their gestures, and shaped the narratives that grew into early mythic frameworks. Through this ongoing interaction, early humans began to understand that the world spoke to them in subtle ways. The external landscape became intertwined with their internal landscape, guiding them toward decisions, actions, and interpretations that helped ensure their survival. This connection between place and perception laid the groundwork for the symbolic messages that would later define human spirituality, messages that reflected not only the physical world, but the deepening inner world awakening within the first ancestors. As the bond between early humans and the landscape deepened, a new layer of spiritual transmission began to take form, one that did not rely on spoken language or written symbols. Instead, it lived in the body, in movement, in repetition, and in the quiet endurance of memory passed from one generation to the next. These first ancestors understood the world not through explanation, but through experience, and experience shaped a kind of knowledge that was felt before it was thought. This embodied wisdom became a vessel for spiritual messages, carrying lessons across thousands of years without a single word needing to be carved or spoken. Young members of the group learned more by watching than by being instructed. They observed how elders approached certain trees with caution or reverence, how specific stones were placed in meaningful patterns, how movement slowed or quickened depending on unseen cues in the environment. These behaviors were absorbed through imitation, forming an internal library of responses that blended survival techniques with early spiritual interpretation. In this way, knowledge did not simply pass from one generation to another, it transformed, gathering emotional depth as each individual added their own experience to the collective memory. Over time, this embodied communication evolved into the earliest symbolic gestures. A hand pressed to the chest could communicate gratitude or sorrow. A slow circling of the fire could signify unity or remembrance. A gesture toward the distant mountains might acknowledge forces larger than the group itself. These expressions became part of a shared language that existed independently of words, a silent code enriched by the emotional undercurrents of daily life. Through these gestures, early humans cultivated a sense of connection to something beyond their immediate reality, strengthening the threads of spiritual awareness that had begun forming long before. The environment itself became a participant in this silent transmission. When certain animals behaved in unusual ways or when the wind carried an unexpected scent, the group responded intuitively, drawing upon generations of inherited interpretation. These reactions were not mere instincts, but reflections of internalized knowledge shaped by ancestral experience. In this interplay between perception and response, early humans developed a sense of meaning that traveled through the body, guiding them through uncertainty with remarkable resilience. As these embodied messages accumulated, they began to form a foundation for symbolic thought that would later blossom into more complex forms of expression. Rituals grew more deliberate, gestures gained nuance, and the emotional vocabulary of the group expanded. This growing sophistication hinted at the next step in human evolution, the capacity to translate the deep, unspoken wisdom of the body into structured symbols, stories, and beliefs. In this way, the earliest spiritual messages lived not in objects or carvings, but in movement, in memory, and in the quiet persistence of human connection stretching unbroken through countless generations. As these embodied memories and silent transmissions shaped the consciousness of countless generations, a deeper thread began to weave itself through the human experience. It was the understanding that spiritual strength was not merely a reaction to danger or uncertainty, but a force that endured across millennia, adapting yet remaining constant in its essence. The early ancestors who looked at fire, who traced patterns in the earth, who raised their eyes toward mountains and stars, were not simply surviving. They were laying the groundwork for a sense of meaning that would outlast them. This enduring message was carried through gesture, ritual, landscape, and emotion, forming a quiet lineage of inner strength that connected each generation to the next. Even without language, they understood that life required more than instinct. It required resilience of the spirit, the ability to hold steady when the world shifted around them. Over time, these perceptions shaped a collective awareness that stretched far beyond the immediate challenges of survival. When a group mourned a fallen member with a moment of stillness, they were acknowledging that life echoed beyond the physical form. When they revisited a familiar cave or gathered at the same tree year after year, they were participating in a dialogue with memory itself. And when they passed down rituals through repetition rather than explanation, they ensured that meaning would remain intact even as the world around them changed. Through these acts, they transmitted an unspoken message: that human beings are never fully alone, that the strength of those who came before continues to flow through those who walk the earth now. This message, carried across 5.1 million years, still reaches you today. It lives in the instinct to seek connection, in the urge to create meaning, in the quiet moments when you sense something larger moving beneath the surface of your thoughts. The spiritual resilience of the first ancestors is not a relic of the past. It is a living echo within you, guiding you through your own moments of uncertainty. Their world was harsh, unpredictable, and often unforgiving, yet they found the capacity to look inward, to anchor themselves in symbols born from survival and shaped by intuition. And through this inner anchoring, they built the earliest foundations of what we now call the human spirit. If you have come this far in the journey, it means the ancient thread that moved through them has reached you as well. If this exploration stirred something in you, leave a comment with the phrase, "This message lives in me, so I know you felt the depth of what we uncovered together." And if the value of this journey resonated with you, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and leave a like to help this work continue reaching those who seek meaning in the ancient echoes of humanity. There is a video here waiting that expands even further on these ideas, so follow the path forward and continue walking with me into the deeper layers of our shared past.